Welcome back to Headgears to Handshakes. I'm here with Fred Ewig. He's a business consultant. I think that would be the terminology of it.
Business coach, business consultant. Yep.
And we're going to talk about how you got started in wrestling, how you bring that into your trade now, and just a little bit about what you do. So how'd you get started in wrestling, and how's that path?
Yeah. So I always joke my career in wrestling was pretty short and undistinguished. I got started in wrestling because I was in high school and I weighed 95 pounds. And our heavyweight turned to me and he said, "Hey, how would you like to wrestle?" Because we needed a 103 pounder. I did that. So I literally hadn't even thought about wrestling until my freshman year of high school. My freshman year I started, and the challenge, so I was at prep school at the time, and literally the next closest weight was, he was our 130 pounder. So my practices were miserable, and I was like, all right, you know what? I gave up. I was like, I can't do this. Like practices, I was going against guys way bigger than me. I weighed 95 pounds. So I actually switched schools, and my junior year, I kind of rediscovered it, and I weighed about 103 then. So I was like, sweet, I can still wrestle 103. And honestly, I always look back on it in hindsight. I was like, I wish I had kind of stuck with it my freshman year. And saw it through, because the 2 years that I did do it in high school, so I wrestled 103 and 112, I learned so much, and I learned a lot about the dedication and discipline and all the skills that wrestling teaches you, on top of actually just being in the best shape of my entire life, but was so far behind everybody that I wrestled. So like I said, my career was relatively short, but I got to experience a lot. Where I've kind of fallen back in love with wrestling is now my son. I've gotten him into the sport, and he's been doing it since he was like 6 or 7. He's in middle school now, so it's about 5 years, almost 5-6 years now. And just watching it through his eyes and seeing what he's been able to do with it, and taking all the stuff that we've done. I mean, he's already done stuff that I could never have thought of, and just watching him do it, it's cool. And just now, also being in touch with the community of wrestlers and wrestling families is amazing. So.
Are you in the Princeton Wrestling Club, or what club are you guys?
So we're at SEPA, which is in PA, right over the bridge there. So I always joke it's 20 minutes to Princeton or 20 minutes there. So we had some friends that so we live in Lawrence, which is right next to Princeton. And one year my son just decided to keep going. When the rec season stopped, he wanted to keep going. And a couple of his friends went to PA, and so we just kind of followed them. And we've been there for about 3-4 years now. He loves it. Yeah. So, but we do a lot of work. He wrestles with those guys at Princeton a lot, PWC guys. And he got, a couple of years ago, he got to qualify for the New Jersey State Youth Championship in Trenton, which was a really cool accomplishment. And one of my favorite. We walked into the arena, and he says, I'm going to win 2 matches today. And I was like, all right. I know one kid that's, he's been wrestling with forever that's really good has not won a match in 4 years. He's I'm like, yeah, right. And sure enough, he walked out with 2 wins. He went 2-2 on the day, and I was like, all right, bud, he didn't place, but you hit your goal, and let's figure out what the next goal is, right? So I've been able to fall back in love with wrestling kind of all these years later, just watching it through his eyes. And so now he just had his first middle school match yesterday, which was nice, won that. Now I'm getting to watch the school journey too, on top of the youth side. So
that's fun. He got started earlier than you did, huh?
Way earlier than I did. Yeah. And it was all because one of our friends was like, "Oh, you should just bring him out. He'd have a good time." And then he's stuck with it. He loves it.
It's amazing because people that even just wrestled in high school, they get it. They get the hard work. They get how it's tough. How nobody notices you, but you do the work anyways. And a lot of very successful people only wrestled in high school. And it just is amazing how even just being a part of the sport for 2-3 years, you're a part of it. You don't have to spend your whole life on it to be a part of our sport. And that's something as you get older and you meet all these very successful people that have very different backgrounds and how many years, they get it.
Yep.
We all get it the same. It's hard.
Yeah.
If anything, the less time you spend in it, the harder it was.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah, it's easier for him now. But no.
Yeah. So that's neat. And so then you wrestled a little bit in high school, and then you went to college. What college did you go to?
So I started at Ithaca College. My dream was to be a sports journalist. They have a really good journalism program. Quickly decided I did not want to be a journalist, but I love sports. I've always been, again, just going back to that theme, I've always been tied to it. So I actually went more the business side. Ended up transferring to Widener University, which had a sport management major, which at the time was one of the few schools that actually had a sport management major in their business school. A lot of them do now. It's kind of a much more common thing. But I was able to get a business degree with a concentration in sports, which set me up for my career of kind of what I've done since. But yeah, so I graduated from Widener, which is in Chester, PA, right outside of Philadelphia.
So let's talk about that gap from college to career.
Yeah.
Like, what was that gap? Because a lot of kids, they graduate school and they don't know what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. They kind of have an idea, and sometimes it's a complete 180, right?
Yeah. So my career, again, it's very, it's followed a very, just like most, it's followed an interesting path. Again, I knew I wanted to do something I was passionate about. That I've known since I was really young. And so that's why the sports thing always resonated with me. I could have been, I could have picked a number of different careers. I always wanted to do something where I would have a passion for it, right? So right after school, like literally coming out of school, I already had a job with the New Jersey Devils in their sales department, selling tickets and what have you. So did that for a little bit. Actually left sports for a minute, like went to work for, did the whole, this is early 2000s, went to work for Yahoo during the whole .com, craze, and then realized very quickly that I didn't have a passion in the internet. Like, I mean, obviously it was important, but it wasn't something I was passionate about. So literally went back, took an internship at a minor league baseball team to get back into the world.
What was the team, the minor league
the
team?
Newark Bears.
Okay.
Yeah. I used to have Ricky Henderson and Jose Canseco on the team, and that's a grind. I mean, literally, we'd have 10-game homestands. You'd work, basically like 13, 14 hours a day, like for 10 days in a row, and you're just like, all right, let's go. Like, you just have to push through, just like anything else. I always tell people wrestling. One of the things I got from wrestling is that when you think you're done giving it all, you got to give that little extra, right? And that's kind of what I felt there too. It was like, so I did that, and by the time I left, I was running all of our grassroots marketing and a lot of our community initiatives, and then got to work in college basketball for about 12 years, running events, a lot of college basketball, like the early season tournaments that you see at like Madison Square Garden or the Barclays Center or Prudential Center around here, and loved that. And by the time I left that company, I was basically running also their internship program. Like I was their HR department. I was basically like the COO without the title. And got an opportunity to start this youth sports facility that literally just broken ground. And I was like, all right, because I always wanted to be a part of something like brand new, right, and build it. And got to do that. We opened March 3rd of 2020, closed 10 days later because of COVID. But then literally was able to see it back starting that summer and grew it into, it's like a multi-million-dollar facility now.
Wow.
Which, it was awesome.
What's the name of the facility?
It's called Iron Peak Sports and Events.
Okay.
Yeah, it's up in Hillsborough. About a half hour from here, and I'd say it was like a giant playground. You had turf fields, you had indoor and outdoor turf fields, you had basketball, volleyball courts. One of the things I did was partner with our local wrestling club, and we hosted some really cool wrestling events there. The Central, I think it was the Central Jersey League, ran their JV and varsity divisions there, and a couple of open tournaments that we used to host there. And then, but like I said, that life wasn't conducive to family life. So I was like, all right, what do I want to be when I grow up? And the opportunity to coach on a business side came across, and I was like, I had to jump at it. It was just, it was. So while it's kind of been like a winding path, like it's all kind of, been a long line to where I am now, which I think has been really cool.
What are some of the businesses you've worked with, if you're allowed to say?
Yeah, right now, like nothing that anybody would recognize. They're all smaller businesses, all 50 employees or fewer, but across all, I have some in the sports world, one that is a sports facility company, one that I have, swimming clients, insurance, the trades. Actually, I find that a lot of companies that are in construction or in the trades, this is businesses in general. The business starts because somebody's good at the craft, right? They're good at what the business does. So they decide, hey, I'm going to start a business about this. But they don't have the strategy behind it, or they get somewhere and they're like, all right, cool, but just through their hard work and determination, and then they kind of get plateaued, right?
Yeah.
Or they get burnt out, and it's like, all right, what do I do now? So trades is a big one for me.
What's the biggest thing you see when you're working with these companies that you say, all right, this is the first place we stop because this is usually the problem, right?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is actually going back to what we were talking about a little earlier is time. You know, people feel that there's not enough time in the day, where I think that if people take a little bit more control, or if they prioritize what needs to be done, and like I said, as we talked about earlier, what we could delegate, that is key, because all of what I do doesn't work if you don't put in the time to actually make it happen, right? Like I could coach you I can give you the best plan in the world, but if you're not actually doing it, you're not actually taking even a few hours out of a day, or a few hours a week even, to work on strategic things and on those big picture things that are important long term, it doesn't matter, right? It's like some people, the best personal trainer can give you the best workout plan, and if it's just sitting on your desk, it's not going to do any good.
You can
right?
talk about the single leg if you ain't hitting.
Yeah, exactly. You're not
you're not
getting 100%, right? Yeah, exactly, right. So, and that's the, and that's where a lot of this like mindset stuff comes in, with the wrestling mindset of like, all right, it's hard. Like this isn't easy, right? And so you have a couple choices. It's like, all right, do you want to push through and figure it out, or are you giving up? And nobody ever takes a give up thing, right? This is a kind of side note, but like my daughter used to wrestle for a bit, and one of the reasons I had her wrestle is because she was like the princess, right? And she was very used to being on top ultimately, right? She was always in control, and I always wanted her to have the experience of like, hey, sometimes you're on bottom. Sometimes you got to get up. Like sometimes, something's bearing down on you, and you got to figure out how are you going to get up. And she did it actually. She was pretty good for a while, and unfortunately, just lost the passion. And that was. And then wrestling is a sport where you can't be half in, half out. She learned that pretty quickly. But it's a lot of those types of same things. I mean, they apply to businesses, right? You're going to think you're going to walk in with the best game plan in the world, and then somebody else, all of a sudden they hit you with a quick low single off the whistle, and you're like, wait, what happened here, right? You got to adjust, right? And now how do you do that, right? And then how do you take back control, right? That's the other thing, is like, how do you deal with that temporary setback, but then get back into where you're going to thrive? The other thing too that I work with all my clients on is goal setting, and then also the measurements along the line. So like, because if I don't know where you're going, I can't help you get there, right? Like if I don't know, and if you don't know where you're going, you don't even know, So we do a lot of like, all right, where do you see yourself? What's the vision for where you want to be? And then that's when, then we get to the fun of putting the plan together.
So do you usually work just with individuals, or are you looking at it from bird's eye view and saying these are the working components, or a little bit of both?
A little bit of both, right? So I am working with the individuals primarily. Usually it's the business owner themselves, because they are smaller companies. Sometimes I'll work with like C-level executives. So I'll do some executive coaching, but it's also like, hey, like let's build you an org chart. Like what does your org chart look like? Like it's some of these like really 30,000 foot view type things, all the way down to and again, it just depends on where their challenges are, but like, hey, if you don't feel like you have enough time, like where are you spending your time? Who can take some of this stuff off your plate, right? Or do you have the right people in the right seats? And those are some of those uncomfortable conversations. Like, and sometimes I am their accountability person too. Like they know what they have to do, and and they, but I'm just the guy that has to hold them to it.
Did you do that thing?
Did you do that thing we talked about?
Tuesday?
Yep, exactly. So, and honestly, they love it. Like they know what they have to do, but until they had somebody that's going to hold their feet to the fire, right? Then they're just going to keep pushing it off, right? But now they're like, oh, I got to meet with Fred on Tuesday. I got to make sure I get that stuff done. That because otherwise he's going to pound me about it again, right? So, yeah, it's a fun job.
I would love to hear your philosophy on this, because I heard this argument not long ago.
Okay.
And I had a friend who was a high level consultant.
Okay.
And there's a guy who's a current owns a business, doing really, really well. And they were arguing because the guy that owns the smaller business is saying, I'd rather take somebody that works hard. You can develop, but he's got that trade. Maybe he doesn't have the skills, but he works hard. And the guy that works with the bigger companies, and he's been out of it a long time now, he goes, well, no, it's like you got to hire people that are smarter than you for the position, because otherwise, when your company gets too big, you're wasting time trying to teach them. And really, it's great because you have the hard worker, but when you really look at it, it's 1 out of 10.
Right,
it's 1 out of 10 actually get there, and the bigger your organization gets, you just don't have time to teach, and you just have it just is what it is. And they were just arguing. I'm just curious to hear your philosophy on that.
So that's actually really good. I like that because it's a bit of both, right? So I believe that people hire too much based on what's on a resume. I think the soft skills are actually super important because you're not gonna you have the greatest experience in the world and work for all the greatest firms and what have you. If you don't have the work ethic and the drive and the determination, you're gonna that's why the turnover rates are what they are, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's those soft skills.
How do you find those soft skills then?
So one of the things I do with my clients is we do disc tests, which is it's basically a behavior and communication test, and really measures what their communication style is, what their motivations are, what kind of gets them up at night, what keeps them up at night, like all those types of things, right? As you do that, and one of the things I'll do is we'll do job benchmarking. Like if they're hiring for somebody, right? I say, talk to me about your ideal salesperson. And if it's a bigger company, I'll usually get a few people in the room, right? The hiring manager, who the direct report would be, maybe the head, the VP of sales, the CMO, whatever. And they put together this profile, and then literally the applicants take that test, and we see where they rank in terms of all those different qualities that people want, right?
Yep.
Again, some of it's not an exact science, right?
Yeah.
But the soft skills I think really do help. Now, to the point of the point of hiring people that are smarter than you, I think you definitely need to hire people that are smarter than you because you don't. First of all, you can't be the smartest person at everything. You can't know everything, right? There are going to be areas where you're best at, right? And then there are going to be areas where other people are really good at or best at, right? And you could do it, but it's going to take them a lot less time to do it than it's going to take you, right? So you want to make sure you have those right people in, but you also want to make sure you have the processes in place, because to your point about teaching and training, you can automate so much now in the training and onboarding and stuff like that, and the more you document, then if there is a turnover in personnel, it's a lot less manual to kind of bring in somebody to right?
Processes, having all the processes in order.
100%.
We're dealing with that right now with the NWCA.
Yeah.
Making sure we track everything, and
it is amazing.
It's easy for someone to pick it up. When I took over this, I was figuring things out, and maybe it took a little longer because those weren't in place. So that I get exactly what you're talking about.
It's amazing. And again, it's just sometimes it's just because they started really small and they didn't need to worry about it, and then they grew and grew and grew, but they still didn't have process or documented processes.
Yeah.
So then as soon as somebody would leave, well, there goes the process out the door, right?
He has the password
all their knowledge,
to this.
right?
He's
their
got
knowledge,
that. Why does
Yeah.
We're still paying his cell phone bill or whatever, right?
Yeah. I have a client that's it's a pretty large client, just in the area. I mean, they're $30+ million in revenue, and I'm working with them right now, and it's a bit of a slog. It's they have no process for a lot of things, and they also don't have metrics or KPIs that they kind of use to it's basically, hey, what's our top line, what's our bottom line? Those are their things, but there's so many different pieces along the lines that they can measure to see. All right,
metrics.
The metrics,
reaching it. Where are we at compared to
100%.
last year? Yeah.
Yep. And literally, I met with the director the other day, and he literally, I talked to him. I said, hey, here's where your challenge is. He said, it's funny because I thought I was doing a great job. I kept being told I was doing a terrible job. I never knew how they were measuring me, and I said, well, this is it, and this is the benchmark that they want you to hit. So, and he said, nobody ever said that to me, and I said, that's pretty interesting. So now it's all right, now I got to go talk to the executives to make sure that communication is that A, that the metrics are set, and then B, that they're being communicated down to the people that need to have them. So yeah.
I'm loving this. So there's this. I overheard this conversation, and I'm trying not to give away anybody, but
you're good.
There's this very high level guy, and we were considering we ended up doing it anyways, but one of those big quizzes you take, and that you can, somebody's trying to make a hire, you could say, well, he's taken this index test or one of those things. And we talked to a lot of people, and a lot of people disagreed. There's both sides of it. And this guy was extremely high level, and makes a lot of money, very, very successful everywhere he's gone. And he said he went to go get this one job, and they had him take one of those index tests. and he didn't end up getting the job. And he goes, well, what happened? And he goes, well, you took the test and it said that you were an individual that you would be willing to break the rules if it wasn't going to hurt you or the company, if it was going to help the company get ahead.
Okay.
And he goes, well, yeah, I would. Nobody's getting in trouble and I can whatever, but they didn't like that. And so his philosophy was always, he goes, it doesn't mean I'm the wrong hire. I would help push the company forward.
Right.
He goes, I think an index test would be used more of how do you lead your individuals. Sure. And so that was his logic. And he goes, and he's kind of said, screw you guys, and took another job and was extremely successful and built the company. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I guess how do you see it? Do you think that's really important on the hiring? Maybe he wasn't the right hire for them because of that, or do you see it more for being able to manage, or?
So both. So one thing that just on that specifically, like if the company's values are about following rules and like, hey, we have this structure in place for a reason, then anybody that if their test is showing that, hey, they're going to break the rules, even if it's in the greater good or like whatever, if their values are hey, this is the way it's got, then it makes sense, right? That there would be a disconnect there, and he probably wouldn't last very long. Like that's so. In the long run, probably the better, without knowing the company.
Right, yeah.
But it might have been the better thing anyway. I do love to get ahead of it as in the screening process because I find, the hardest thing is once you have somebody on board, right? Then now you're onboarding them. Then you got to train them, and then you got to fit right. And now you're like 3 months into the job, and you don't even know if they're doing a good job. Like if you haven't ever tested them before, like if you don't know kind of where they're coming from. And then if you have to you have to start this process all over again, right? They say that like to hire somebody, it's like 30% of their salary. Like to hire somebody to replace somebody is about 30% of that position's salary, right? Because the time you spend in recruiting and interviewing and onboarding, so I'd love to get ahead of it. Now, that being said, I've also walked into some teams and they're pretty dysfunctional or trying to figure out why the communication is going. So those work really well too, because then you're like, all right, especially like I said, I use the disc pretty exclusively, but it's just because then I see, all right, the reason that Jane isn't responding to John over here is because she's hearing what he's saying. So my mom always said, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I say it to my kids all the time. But it's not just that, it's also how it's being received, right? And that's actually the most important part. So he might think he's saying it really well. She could be receiving this very differently, right? So understanding how people communicate and how they behave and where their values are and where they fit in the spectrum of things, I think is super helpful as you try to lead, because you can't lead, it's just like coaching a team, right? I can't coach 10 wrestlers the exact same way, because if I use the stick with this guy, that could work, but I use the stick with this guy, he's going to crumble, right? So, we got to figure out what are the things that are going to make that person better, right? And get that person to where they got to go. So that's why I love those tests. If you don't catch it early, then that way you can help catch it while it's...
That's true. Yeah. My wife worked for Novo Nordisk, and I remember they would test them all once a year pretty much.
Oh, really?
Because there's a lot of growth, some change. And she'd always come home and say, "You need to take this test so we know how to communicate better."
It's funny, like so as much as I love it, like it's a static, it's a static test, right? So to your point, like so it's however you feel when you're taking that test at that moment is kind of what's going to come across, right? So you could be having the best day and you're like, all right, cool, or you could really hate your job and all of a sudden you're taking the test. It's got a very different, But yeah, it's fun. I showed when I first took the test, I was kind of vetting this to see if this would work. I took the test and I read it. I'm like, well, this seems pretty spot on. I gave it to my wife, and she's like, yeah, this and this. And it's like, why don't you take the test? She's like, no, I'm good. I don't need to take the test. So, yeah.
Yeah. What's the biggest pushback you get when you start working with a company where things get uncomfortable and there's anytime there's change, there's going to be some pushback.
Yes.
Where's that moment in the process? Because I'm sure as you repeated it with these different companies, you come to that point where it gets uncomfortable. What's that point?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. When we talk staffing, and that's a big one, especially if there's got to be some sort of change in staffing, right? I've had clients that will complain to me about a certain employee for a long time, and I'm like we've got to figure something out, because it can't and it don't have to necessarily get rid of this person, but if that's it's honestly actually there's you ever read Good to Great, Jim Miller? It's a great book. So I'm pretty sure it was from that book. He was like, you're actually better off letting somebody go in a job that they're terrible at, so that they could go find something that they want to do. But it doesn't still make it easier for me to sit across the table and say, hey, listen, this isn't the right opportunity for you. You have to go. So I've had some uncomfortable moments with some of my clients where I'm like, hey, like, I think it's time. Like, I think you have to, cut this off. And I had one client that never did. And, it's funny, like, not funny, but like we ended up, we stopped working together partially because of cash flow issue, because he was like, this one guy wasn't cutting his weight. He was a company of like 15. So like when one guy's not pulling his weight, and he was paying him a decent salary. So then I see him fast forward a year, and I'm like, hey, how's so-and-so? Oh, this is the last straw. I'm like,
still hasn't gotten rid of
him, and so that, like, those types of things, and they're hard, right? Those are the hardest ones because there's a human element to it, I think.
But that's where understanding yourself as a leader. So just so you know, 100%. When I was a coach at Campbell, I would actually sit down with my team at the beginning of every year and expectation. I say, here's my weakness, and I'll be honest with you, and this is something I'm going to have to always work on. And I always held on too long to guys. And 9 times out of 10, it burned me. It was almost worse. It affected others, and I was always like, because the way I viewed coaching, like results. That's part of like being able to keep your job. But to me, I coached because I wanted to change lives. I wanted to build people. My brother does that. He's at underprivileged school and phenomenal coach. Like my dad did it. Like that's why we're into coaching. So it's super hard for me to say, well, I also have to look after the team. This is my organization. And I would have to, like, to understand that about myself, right? When you're the one in charge, it falls on you, right?
100%. Yeah. So I joke that I became a coach so that people didn't make the same mistakes I made when I was, a manager and a leader, because I had a lot of those same. They're not easy conversations to have, right? And there were definitely situations in the past where I held on to people too long. It hurt the culture of the organization because people, it wasn't a secret that this person wasn't pulling their weight, right? Like, and everybody kind of, and then accountability goes out the window, right? So now there's no accountability because this person is not doing it. So why should this person do it? Why should that person do it, right? So I would say, like, listen, let me make the mistakes so they don't have to, right? So I learned along the way too, and it's never, like I said, it's never an easy conversation. And I always tell people it's a lot easier for me on the outside to say, hey, you should do X, Y, and Z. Now you have to, then and have you do it. Like, it's a lot easier for me to say, hey, when you're down, like, hey, get up. That's easy. My son's like, yeah, I'm trying. Like, I get it, right? But at the same time, like, it still needs to, sometimes it still needs to be said, and it still needs to, like, it has to happen at some point, right? So it is the hardest part, and that's probably where it's gotten most uncomfortable. There have been other ones where, like, I'll ask for things a lot of times, and after a while, like one client, I just told him there was one project, and I was like, you have to do this, and you have to do this, and he kept putting it off. I said, here's what you're going to do one day. You're going to put your out of office on. You're going to close your email. You're not going to answer any things, and you're going to get this project done. And like finally, I had to be like, that it's going to have to happen that way. And I emailed him that day to see if his out of office was on. And of course, the next time we met, the project was done. I was like, and honestly, it was a thing he kept putting off, and it was so uncomfortable for him. And that's the only human capital one where he was, and I was like, just get it done. I promise you. Like, you'll feel better. And he actually felt so much better because it was no longer hanging over his head, but because it was something that he was dreading to do, like, he just kept putting it off and putting it off. I was like,
what % would you say? Because I'm sure it's a mix where it's one of those. It's just somebody other than dad telling me to do it, right? Like, where they know what the problem is, and they know they kind of have an idea of what the solution is, but they just need somebody who's a professional who's been through it to tell them that. What percentage is it that, and what percentage is it where there's this aha? Oh, I didn't realize that's such, like, I had no idea that was the problem.
I'd say it does vary. I'd say it's almost like 50-50. Because even the ones when I'll say something, they're like, oh yeah, of course, like, and like but. Like I said, there was one client that literally said, he's like, I know exactly what I need to do. I just need you to tell me to do it. And I was like, exactly, so I think that there is, and that's one of the challenges in kind of promoting myself as a business coach is people have to be vulnerable enough to admit that they need some outside help. And it's not that they don't know what they're doing, or that's not that they're lacking in anything. But sometimes it's good just to have another set of eyes, or to your point, have somebody that's not their dad telling them something, and this isn't a wrestling thing, but my son also plays baseball, and I also coached him in baseball for a number of years, and I would, when he had his batting stance, and I was like, it was killing me. I'm like, dude, you got to stop doing this. He was choking up. I was like, stop. So I took him to a private hitting coach, and the first thing the guy's like, stop choking up, and immediately, boom. I was like, I mean, I could have paid somebody $50, a couple years ago and told you that, but sometimes to your own, it's not the message, it's the messenger. It's the messenger. So I think sometimes just hearing it from somebody else, it either confirms what they want, confirms what they know they need to do, but also somebody to hold them to it. I think that's the other piece. Like they know they need to do it, but until you have somebody actually like I said, put your feet to the fire, that's when it becomes a little more real.
So every company, if they're struggling, there's usually a choke point.
Yeah.
Do you help define that choke point, or do you kind of just lead with questions and help them find it? Like how?
I do a lot. I lead with a lot of questions.
Yeah.
That is literally because what I want to try to find is that choke point, and they typically know where it is, right? They'll figure it out. Actually, I teach. One of the things I do is actually teach a course. It's called the Entrepreneur Growth Course. It's like a group, like an online group course. And one of the things we talk about is like where in the process are things getting stalled, right? And then like how do we remove that obstacle? And as you get people talking, as you start to ask questions, because honestly, a lot of this is asking questions and getting people to reflect. The answers are always there. They know it at some point when they start speaking out loud, like, oh yeah, like this goes and this goes and that's where it is, right?
Yeah.
Or sometimes, like literally, again, if it comes down to metrics, those are easy because then I can be like, all right, if we're talking marketing, you got this many leads, that current this many estimates, this many proposals, and this many contracts. Well, if one of those numbers isn't jiving, we can figure out what we need to improve in the process, right? But a lot of times, it's just through asking questions and figuring out, all right, like, what does this look like? How does this, and then they start to come up with it on their own, and that makes it a lot easier too. When it's their idea versus mine, I try to help it be their idea.
Yeah, and you usually work with the boss, right? You work with the owner.
Yep.
How much of that does the whole office know about? Do you sometimes do private sessions?
Yeah, so I do. Like sometimes I'll work, as I mentioned. Like I had the one client I was working with, one of their directors. So it just depends on what they're trying to accomplish. Some do, some will tell their people, hey, I'm working with a business coach. One client had his VP be very scared because they were working with a business coach. I'm like, that's not a good sign. And actually what we were working on was, and it was meant to initially help the VP. The VP ended up leaving just on her own. It was very odd, but like we were working on actually how to grow the company and like how to expand and what this new role, like what the new role for the VP could be like on a grander scale. And so some are more open about it, and then some are a little bit more like, hey, listen, I just want to keep, and I keep everything confidential. Like I don't. That's one thing. Like even if I worked with Fortune 50 company or Fortune 500 company, like I wouldn't tell you just because.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I keep everything confidential. I'll talk in generalities, and I let my clients know that like it's not it's just so everything that they say between us like stays between us. Yeah, so.
That's great. So if I'm a business owner, I'm having some problems, or I just am not growing at the speed I want to grow. Yeah. What's something you would tell them?
Yeah. So first of all, I try to find out what is the speed they want to grow, right? Because sometimes it's also not realistic, right? So like I got to make sure that the targets they're setting. So if they're selling $1 widgets and they're making $500, and they say I want to be at $1 million, well, let's get you to 1,000 first, right?
Yeah.
So I got to figure out like what are their what are their goals and the benchmarks, like how are we going to measure success here? And then to your point, like then I got to figure out, all right, is this a marketing issue? Is it a process issue? Is it is it a sales issue? Like where are we? Like where could we really hit the fire or put the gas on the fire to really start to scale this thing out, right? Like because if sales blew up, could you fulfill the orders? Like, would that happen? Or if even if you had the best salespeople in the world, are you getting the lead flow to actually be able to convert people, right? If nobody's coming in the door, you can't sell, right? So it's like, where do we need to really kind of focus? So we do. I do a lot of work, kind of in the very beginning. Is just kind of fact finding. Like, all right, where are you? Like, what business are you in? Who are your competitors? What are your KPIs and metrics? Like literally just, I want to know the business in and out, right? And then we start to work on some of those other pieces specifically. I do try to like, I joke that is, like if you're bleeding, I'll try to put a bandage on the wound, but then I got to also figure out why you were bleeding in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So that's like my very first client, and like really not supposed to do it the way I did it, but like my very first client was just getting his business started, and so like usually like I'd like to kind of start with this, just really general, like, hey, talk to me about your business kind of thing, but he just needed to start selling. Like he invested a lot of money in a franchise. He was getting absolutely nowhere. So, and he was an accountant by trade who decided just to give that up and to start a personal training franchise. And I was like, cool, let's go. But the first thing we did was like sales 101. Like, how do you sell? And he and I just worked on sales training. First for him and then for his staff. So then we went from closing like 25% of their leads to like 75% of their leads.
Wow.
And that was huge. And like also now we can take a step back. Again, we've got the bandage on. Now we've got cash flow coming in. All right, let's take a look at like, all right, what are you trying to accomplish? Let's look at the bigger picture. And we've been like, actually, like I say, he's my first client. We're still working together now. He actually was named, so he was a franchise. It's his first year of the franchise. He was named the first time ever franchise of the year as a rookie franchise, which was good, franchisor. So obviously something was going well, and he's expanded to different territories and stuff since. But yeah, so it really varies because it really depends on like where. So that's why I always say like, what are you trying to accomplish and what's holding you back? Those are my first two questions.
Yeah.
And once I know that, then everything else goes from there.
So let's say I'm listening to this podcast and I just have these bells going off. Some things you're saying are just resonating. How would somebody get a hold of you to just maybe ask more questions or to learn more?
Yeah. So there's my website, which is fredewig.focalpointcoaching.com. But email is always great, which is fewig@focalpointcoaching.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and all and on LinkedIn. Those are the best ways to reach me.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Thanks for being on the podcast, and
Thanks.
We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, man. It's great.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. All right.